5 recruits had her cornered in the mess hall. 30 seconds later, they were flat on the floor, while she stood there calm, not even out of breath. You're about to see how a simple woman, mocked, underestimated, and publicly humiliated, revealed she had the kind of training that terrifies even elite soldiers. And trust me, once you find out who she really is, you'll never judge anyone by appearances again. Watch until the end, because the moment her true identity drops is the moment the entire base changes forever. This is A Simple Woman Stories. Hit subscribe right now, and let's dive in. 5 recruits had been watching her since morning, their eyes tracking her like predators testing their prey. Emily Walker stepped into the mess hall carrying nothing but a tray and her quiet composure. The air inside was thick with the smell of overcooked coffee and steam from industrial-sized soup pots, the clatter of trays and utensils creating a steady military rhythm. Around her, soldiers in fatigues laughed in clusters, trading stories from drills. She moved through the room like a ghost, noticed by few, recognized by none. To most here, Emily was just another fresh recruit. No one knew the truth, that beneath the plain uniform and calm demeanor lived a woman whose training rivaled the most dangerous operatives in the world. For now, she was content to let that truth stay buried. She scanned the room, searching for an empty seat, when a chair scraped loudly in her path. Brandon Cole leaned back, a smirk stretching across his face. Flanking him were Jason Reed, Tyler Briggs, Ryan Foster, and Ethan Ward, each one bigger, louder, and itching for an audience. Their table was planted dead center in the hall, where every eye would inevitably wander. "Well, if it isn't our mystery recruit," Brandon said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Where you headed, Walker? Officer's Lounge? Don't think you've earned that yet." Emily didn't break stride, adjusting her tray slightly to avoid bumping him. But Jason slid his foot out, blocking her next step. She stopped, her grey-blue eyes steady on his without a flicker of emotion. "Careful," Jason grinned. "Wouldn't want you tripping in front of the whole hall." Tyler leaned forward, the smell of cheap cologne cutting through the scent of the food line. "What's in the cup? Tea? Bet it's chamomile. Figures." A ripple of chuckles rolled from their table to the ones nearby. Soldiers paused mid-bite, glancing up to see the unfolding drama. Emily shifted her weight just enough to let her boot rest on the edge of Jason's foot, light but deliberate. He twitched, surprised, but she said nothing. Ethan clucked his tongue. "She's too shy to answer, boys. Maybe she's lost, or maybe—" He let the word hang. She wandered into the wrong mess hall. Emily took a slow breath. Her tray didn't shake. Her heartbeat didn't spike. She'd learned long ago that the quietest person in the room often saw the most. And right now, she saw 5 men writing themselves into a lesson they wouldn't forget. Emily's eyes flicked past them to an empty corner table, a spot far enough from the noise to finish her lunch in peace. But Brandon's chair scraped again, cutting off the path. The metallic screech was just loud enough to pull the attention of Captain Dana Hayes, seated across the room with a group of senior officers. Her gaze lingered, assessing, before she returned to her meal without a word. "Come on, Walker," Brandon said, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. "You've been here, what, a week? You think you can just stroll in? No introductions, no respect?" Jason reached over and flicked the brim of her cap, tilting it slightly. "Yeah, show some spirit. Or maybe you're too delicate for the army. What do you think, Tyler?" Tyler smirked. "I think she's scared. Look at her, quiet as a mouse. Bet she's counting the seconds until she can run back to her bunk." Ryan Foster tapped the table with his fork, each metallic clink like a countdown. "We could help her out. Maybe teach her how to earn her place." The mess hall's chatter began to thin. Conversations slowed as more people realized something was happening. Even Frank Alvarez, the janitor, paused mid-swipe of the floor, eyes narrowing as he recognized the look on Emily's face. A look he'd seen in old comrades who had walked through fire and come back sharper. Emily set her tray on the nearest ledge. Not a word, not a glance at their growing smirks. She brushed a stray strand of hair back into her bun, adjusted her sleeves, and took a step forward. Ethan grinned, pushing his chair out to block her again. Not so fast. From the corner, Lena Brooks, a fellow recruit, leaned toward her table-mate. They're pushing her too far, she whispered. They have no idea. Brandon tilted his head, studying Emily as though she were a puzzle. What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? He spread his arms, inviting the mess hall to enjoy the spectacle. Ladies and gentlemen, our new recruit, already too good to talk to her team. A few chuckles scattered through the room, but others watched in silence, sensing a shift in the air. Emily's jaw relaxed, her eyes calm but unblinking. She'd counted the exits, the angles, and the distance to each man. In 30 seconds, everything in this room could change. The tension in the mess hall was palpable, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Brandon leaned back in his chair, spreading his arms wide as if presenting Emily to an imaginary audience. Look at this! New blood! Who thinks she's better than the rest of us? He called out, loud enough for the words to echo against the steel walls. Jason, catching the attention of a nearby table, lifted his voice even higher. Maybe she's too fragile for boot camp. Maybe she wandered in from some yoga retreat. His words drew a few snickers from recruits who didn't know her but were eager to join the pack. Tyler flicked a packet of sugar across the table toward her boots. It skidded across the floor and came to rest against her toe. Oops, he said with mock innocence. Guess you'll be cleaning that up, Walker. Emily didn't move. She simply looked at the packet for a moment, then back at Tyler, her expression unreadable. Ryan stood, his broad frame blocking the light above, and plucked a slice of bread from his tray. Without breaking eye contact, he tore it in half and dropped the pieces into Emily's cup. The coffee rippled dark and bitter. There, he said, now you've got something to chew on. The crowd shifted. Some recruits laughed nervously, others kept their eyes on their trays, unwilling to get involved. The hum of the mess hall had dulled into a low murmur, every sound carrying weight. Ethan reached over and tipped her cap again, this time letting it fall to the floor. Oops, he said, grinning. Better pick that up before Captain Hayes sees you disrespecting uniform. Emily didn't bend. Instead, she stepped past him, just enough to retrieve the cap without breaking the line of her posture. When she straightened, she adjusted it back into place with slow precision. From the corner, Lena Brooks watched, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth. They're testing her, she whispered to the recruit beside her, and she's letting them. Letting them. The recruit frowned. She's not doing anything. Lena's eyes narrowed. Exactly! Brandon clapped his hands twice, drawing attention back to himself. You know what? Let's give Walker a warm welcome. He gestured to the others. Jason stuck his leg into her path again. Tyler slid his chair out with a deliberate screech. Ryan blocked the aisle with his tray held high, and Ethan flanked her from behind. 5 walls of muscle closed in, trapping her in a narrow rectangle of space. All eyes in the mess hall were on them now. Somewhere in the background, Frank Alvarez set down his mop, his jaw tightening. Captain Hayes' chair scraped quietly as she stood, but she didn't move forward, her gaze sharp, as if waiting to see what Emily would do. Emily glanced once around the ring of men. Her fingers twitched near her side. She was calculating, and the recruits didn't have a clue. Brandon's grin widened as he saw the ring of attention around them grow thicker. What's wrong, Walker? No quick comebacks, no smart remarks? Maybe you're the type that needs a little motivation. Jason leaned in close, his breath hot and acrid with cafeteria coffee. You're making this harder on yourself, sweetheart. Just say you don't belong here, and we'll let you go. Tyler let out a sharp laugh. Or maybe she can sing for us. Yeah, give us a tune, prove you're worth our time. The remark drew a wave of laughter from their side of the hall. The kind of laughter that's less about humor and more about watching someone squirm. Emily's gaze shifted, not to Brandon, not to Jason, but to the far corner where Captain Hayes stood. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Emily knew she wasn't going to be rescued. Ryan stepped closer, his shadow swallowing what little space she had left. Here's the deal, he said. voice low enough to be menacing but loud enough for the onlookers to catch every word. "You walk out of this hall right now, and we pretend you didn't disrespect us." Or, he let the word hang, letting the tension grow. "We make sure everyone here remembers you as the recruit who cried in the mess hall." From behind, Ethan gave her a light shove, not enough to knock her off balance, but enough to test her reaction. She didn't stumble. She didn't even blink. The shove drew murmurs from the crowd. Lena Brooks sat forward, her jaw tight, as if she might intervene, but she stayed in her seat. Something in Emily's posture told her this wasn't over. Not yet. Brandon reached over and took the cup from Emily's tray, tilting it so the coffee sloshed dangerously close to her boots. "Oops," he said again, voice drenched in false apology. "Guess clumsy runs in your bloodline, huh?" The insult was cheap. It was meant to provoke, not just her temper, but something deeper. And judging from the faintest flicker in Emily's eyes, he might have succeeded in nudging the wrong nerve. Frank Alvarez, still by the wall, muttered something under his breath. He'd seen hardened soldiers freeze under less pressure. But this woman, she was absorbing every word, every gesture like a sponge. And he knew what happened when a sponge finally squeezed. Brandon's smirk deepened as he leaned forward, so close their noses were almost touching. "Go ahead," he said softly, a dare laced in his tone. "Do something." Emily inhaled slowly, her chest barely rising. She was still calm, too calm. If they had been paying attention, they might have noticed her feet subtly shifting, spacing apart by a precise measure. The mess hall had become a stage, and the curtain was about to rise. The circle of recruits closed tighter, their bodies forming a living wall. The onlookers leaned forward in their seats, some with phones discreetly lifted, sensing a confrontation worth capturing. Brandon raised his voice so the entire mess hall could hear. "Hey everyone! Looks like our quiet recruit needs a little wake-up call." Jason stepped in, tapping 2 fingers against her shoulder like a teacher scolding a child. "You hearing me, Walker? This is the army. You earn respect, you don't just walk in here and take it." Tyler joined in, his tone dripping with mockery. "Or maybe you're in the wrong place altogether. Kitchen's that way, sweetheart. Plenty of dishes for someone like you." Ryan, always the opportunist, snatched the bread roll off her tray and tossed it over her head, where it landed somewhere behind her with a soft thud. "Oops," he said, grinning wide. "Guess I'm hungry." From behind, Ethan leaned just enough to whisper in her ear. "All you gotta do is admit you're in over your head, that you don't belong here. Just say the words and walk away." The mess hall's chatter had faded to silence. Even the clatter from the serving line seemed distant now. Emily stood perfectly still, her hands relaxed at her sides, her face a mask of composure. To anyone else, she might have looked trapped. To those who understood, she was simply waiting for the right beat. Brandon decided to end the game. He reached out, curling his fingers toward the front of her uniform collar, as if to pull her in for one last humiliation. "Guess we'll have to teach you the hard way." He didn't finish. Emily's left hand shot up, catching his wrist mid-motion with a precision that froze his grin in place. In the same breath, her right foot pivoted, her weight shifting low. Before Brandon could react, his arm was twisted behind his back, forcing him down to one knee with a choked gasp. The room erupted in gasps. Chairs scraped. Jason lunged forward, but Emily's boot snapped sideways into his shin, sharp, controlled, enough to drop him to the floor, clutching his leg. Tyler's hands went up in instinctive defense, but Emily stepped inside his guard, palms striking his chest with a force that sent him stumbling back into Ryan. Both crashed into a nearby table, trays and silverware flying. Ethan barely had time to blink before Emily spun, using the momentum to sweep his legs out from under him. He hit the ground with a breathless thud, staring up at her in shock. 30 seconds. 5 recruits down! Emily stood in the center of the chaos, her breathing steady, her gaze level as she surveyed the stunned mess hall. No words, no gloating, just calm. Frank Alvarez's lips curved into the smallest of smiles. Captain Hayes, still standing in the corner, allowed herself the faintest nod. The silence was deafening, and then the whispers began. The first sound to break the mess hall's stunned silence was the metallic clink of a fork hitting the floor. Then came the murmurs, low at first, like the faint hiss of an oncoming wave, before they swelled into a chaotic tide of voices. "Did you see that?" someone hissed from the far table. "She dropped all 5 like it was nothing." Another voice cut in, disbelief threading every word. Lena Brooks sat frozen, half a smile tugging at her lips. She'd suspected Emily could handle herself, but nothing had prepared her for the speed, the precision. It was surgical, almost art. Phones were already out. Some recruits had caught the entire thing, from Brandon's first shove to Ethan hitting the floor. The clips traveled fast. Within minutes, they were in private group chats, then posted to social media pages that thrived on military gossip. A caption began circulating with the first shaky video: "New recruit destroys 5 in mess hall." 30 seconds, no hesitation. By the time Emily picked up her tray again, the footage had already been stitched, slowed down, replayed in frame-by-frame breakdowns. Red circles highlighted the angle of her stance. Arrows traced the fluidity of her movement. Comment sections exploded. "That wasn't just self-defense, that's high-level combat training. Who is she? You don't move like that unless you've been in special forces. SEAL? Ranger? CIA?" In the mess hall, the 5 recruits were still collecting themselves, each wearing a different mix of embarrassment and disbelief. Brandon kept his eyes down, nursing his shoulder. Jason rubbed his shin like it might erase the memory of the kick. Ethan didn't look up at all. Emily, unaffected by the swirl of stares and murmurs, quietly returned her tray to the dish line. She gave Frank Alvarez a polite nod as she passed. The older man's eyes crinkled slightly, as if to say, "I knew it." By the time she stepped outside, the late afternoon sun was warm on the asphalt. She pulled her cap lower and headed for the barracks, ignoring the buzz of notifications from the phone in her pocket. She didn't need to check them to know what was happening. Miles away, in a glass-walled conference room atop one of the city's tallest buildings, Jack Walker was in the middle of a high-stakes negotiation. The CEO of Orion Tactical Systems, Jack had a reputation for playing long games and winning them. His phone, always on silent during meetings, began to vibrate insistently. At first, he ignored it, but when his assistant's knock came, urgent and deliberate, he excused himself with a polite smile. In the hallway, the assistant held out the phone, a muted video already playing. Jack's brow furrowed at the first frame. By the 3rd second, his jaw tightened. By the time Emily's foot swept the last recruit to the floor, his eyes had gone cold and calculating. "How long ago?" he asked. 20 minutes, the assistant replied. "It's moving fast, sir. Already over 500,000 views." Jack slipped the phone into his jacket pocket. "Clear my schedule," he said, his voice even but firm. "I'm going to the base, back at the barracks." Emily sat on the edge of her bunk, her phone vibrating non-stop. Messages from numbers she didn't recognize, old friends she hadn't heard from in years, reporters fishing for a comment. She ignored them all, staring instead at a photo on the wall, her and Jack on the day he left for his first deployment, years before Orion Tactical was even an idea. In the distance, the low hum of a high-performance engine began to rise, distinct and commanding. Those in the know turned their heads toward the sound. On base, only a handful of vehicles had that tone, and they all belonged to people who mattered. Emily stood, tucking her cap under her arm. She knew that sound. The hum grew into a sharp, resonant purr as a black-armored SUV rolled into view, its paint absorbing the late sun like liquid shadow. The Orion Tactical insignia gleamed discreetly on the grille, a mark recognized across military installations worldwide. The engine cut with a decisive growl, and when the driver's door swung open, the mess hall incident officially stopped being an inside story. Jack Walker stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a fitted charcoal suit instead of fatigues. Even in civilian attire, there was a military precision to the way he moved, measured, direct, a man who never wasted energy. His green eyes swept the open courtyard in one slow arc, locking on the barracks entrance. Conversations died mid-sentence. Captain Hayes emerged from the administration building, posture crisp. "Mr. Walker," she said, inclining her head, "this is unexpected." "I'm not here on Orion business," Jack replied evenly. "I'm here for my wife." A ripple of whispers passed through the onlookers. "Wife!" The 5 recruits who'd been flattened in the mess hall appeared at the edge of the group, their faces paling as the connection clicked into place. Emily stepped out from the barracks doorway, her expression calm but unreadable. She walked toward Jack, stopping a few feet away. For a moment they just looked at each other, silent communication passing between them. Then Jack turned his gaze to Captain Hayes. "I understand," he began, voice carrying easily, "that 5 of your recruits thought it was acceptable to corner and humiliate my wife in the mess hall." His words weren't loud, but they hit with the weight of a gavel, and that she handled herself without escalation until escalation became unavoidable. Hayes's jaw tightened. "The incident is under review, Mr. Walker." Jack's eyes cut to Brandon and his crew. "No, the incident is over." He stepped closer, his height and presence shrinking the space between them to nothing. "And let me make one thing clear. If you ever put your hands on her again, you won't just answer to your commanding officer." Brandon swallowed hard, his earlier bravado evaporating. Jack looked back at Hayes. "I'll be filing a formal statement, but in the meantime, I want the security footage preserved. No edits, no convenient gaps." "It's already been secured," Hayes replied, though her tone suggested she'd rather not be having this conversation in front of an audience. Jack's attention returned to Emily, and his voice softened just enough for her to hear. "You okay?" She nodded once. "I'm fine." He offered his hand, and she took it without hesitation. Together they walked toward the SUV. Onlookers parted instinctively, the way crowds make way for something or someone they don't dare obstruct. By the time the vehicle pulled away, the whispers had morphed into something else entirely. The story had just gained a new layer, and the internet was about to feast on it. Within the hour, a fresh wave of clips hit social media, not just Emily's takedown, but Jack's arrival. The captions were pure wildfire. "Mess hall SEAL wife has billionaire husband. Orion tactical CEO confronts recruits." The views doubled, then tripled. And in comment sections across the globe, one question kept surfacing: who exactly is Emily Walker? By nightfall, the footage had breached the walls of military gossip circles and exploded into the mainstream. News outlets picked it up, each adding their own slant. 5 recruits taken down by one woman in 30 seconds was the most common headline, but others leaned into the intrigue of her identity. Photos of Emily and Jack from charity events began surfacing, paired with bold text: Emily Walker, former Navy operative. Orion Tactical's name trended alongside hashtags like #MessHall5, #SealWife, and #WalkerMethod. Analysts on defense podcasts dissected her movements frame by frame, marveling at the efficiency and control. Former Special Forces members chimed in online, some claiming they recognized techniques taught only in elite units. Inside the base, the atmosphere shifted overnight. The recruits who had been whispering about Emily now avoided making eye contact. Brandon's swagger evaporated completely. Even his friends had grown distant, wary of being caught in his shadow. The mess hall had become quieter, the tension still palpable. Captain Hayes found herself fielding calls from higher up, some demanding disciplinary action, others urging her to let the matter fade quietly. She knew neither was likely to happen. The chain of command hated public spectacles, but this one had already grown beyond containment. For Emily, the changes were subtle but telling. Salutes from unfamiliar faces, space made for her in crowded hallways, and always the sense of eyes on her, watching to see what she would do next. Jack, meanwhile, was playing a longer game. While he never commented publicly, behind the scenes he made sure the security footage was sent to a handful of influential journalists known for their hardline stance against bullying and hazing in the military. He didn't need to embellish. Reality was damning enough. 2 days after the incident, an investigative piece dropped on a major news site. It outlined not just what happened in the mess hall, but a pattern of behavior among certain recruits, harassment, intimidation, and the silence of those who witnessed it. The article stopped short of naming everyone involved, but anyone familiar with the base could read between the lines. By the end of the week, the Army's Public Affairs Office issued a carefully worded statement: "The events of last Tuesday are under formal review." The Army remains committed to maintaining a culture of respect, discipline, and professionalism. But the internet didn't deal in careful wording. It dealt in clips, memes, and rallying cries. And now, Emily Walker had become the face of something much bigger than one confrontation in a mess hall. Within 72 hours, the chain reaction was undeniable. What started as a 30-second altercation in a mess hall had spiraled into a full-scale PR firestorm. Military watchdog groups began demanding systemic reform, citing Emily's case as a high-profile example of the toxic hazing culture that still lingered in certain units. Brandon, Jason, Ethan, Tyler, and Ryan found themselves summoned to a closed-door disciplinary hearing. The meeting was short, tense, and final. Each of them placed on probation, 2 facing transfer to other installations. The official line was disciplinary reassignment, but among the ranks it was understood as exile. The ripple effects reached further than they ever anticipated. A clip from the incident was played on a primetime news segment, paired with interviews from retired Special Forces operators who praised Emily's restraint. One former Navy SEAL summed it up perfectly. What she did wasn't just skill, it was control. The kind of control that keeps you alive and keeps others from getting hurt. Meanwhile, Jack's quiet influence continued to shape the narrative. A series of op-eds appeared in national papers, framing Emily's stand as a rare moment of courage in a rigid system where speaking out could end careers. These articles didn't name him, but his fingerprints were all over the precision of their release. On base, attitudes shifted quickly. Where Emily had once been dismissed as the quiet new recruit, she was now greeted with nods of respect. Frank Alvarez, the janitor, took to calling her ma'am with a half grin every time they crossed paths. Even Captain Hayes' tone softened, though she never acknowledged the change outright. Off base, the story's momentum only grew. Social media users began sharing their own experiences with harassment in military and civilian training environments, using the hashtag WalkerStandard. Within a week, thousands of posts carried the tag, some offering solidarity, others demanding reform. For Emily, it was strange, seeing her face, her movements, her 30 seconds replayed endlessly by strangers dissecting her every step. She hadn't set out to become a symbol, but the tide was already moving, and she could either stand against it or guide its flow. That choice was coming sooner than she expected. The hashtag WalkerStandard had started as a rallying cry among veterans groups. But by the end of the second week, it had crossed into mainstream culture. Civilian workplaces, sports teams, even university training programs began adopting the term as shorthand for standing up to harassment with calm, controlled resolve. Influencers latched onto the movement, posting short videos about pulling a walker when shutting down toxic behavior. Advocacy organizations reached out to Emily privately, asking if she would lend her name to their causes. Some wanted her for press conferences, others for panel discussions on leadership and discipline. Jack, ever strategic, was cautious. "This could either burn you out fast or make you untouchable," he told her over coffee in their small kitchen. "The difference is whether you control the message or let them run with it." Emily listened, but her instincts told her something else. This wasn't about her image, it was about the momentum she felt building from the ground up. She began replying to select messages, thanking people for their support, encouraging them to share their own stories. One message in particular caught her attention. A young female recruit from another base wrote about being cornered in a supply room by 3 male trainees. She didn't fight back physically, but she'd used Emily's story to convince her CO to take her complaint seriously. "They listened because I mentioned your name," the message read. That hit Emily harder than she expected. She realized WalkerStandard wasn't just a trend. It was becoming a tool, a kind of shield for people who didn't have the power or training to protect themselves. And maybe, she thought, it was her responsibility to make sure it stayed that way. Emily made her decision on a quiet Sunday morning. She drafted a short statement, read it aloud twice, then recorded a single, unedited video in the living room with nothing but a chair and the sunlight behind her. "My name is Emily Walker," she began, her tone steady but warm. "2 weeks ago, an incident in a mess hall made its way across the internet. You've seen the footage, you know the story. But what matters isn't what I did. It's what we can all do when faced with disrespect, intimidation, or harassment." She went on to explain that WalkerStandard wasn't about fighting back physically. It was about knowing your worth, standing your ground, and acting with control under pressure. She invited anyone who'd use the hashtag to share their story and tag someone else who needed to hear it. Jack posted the video to a newly created page, the WalkerStandard Initiative, and within hours it had been shared over 100,000 times. News outlets picked it up again, framing her as an unlikely leader of a grassroots movement. Veterans associations offered to sponsor self-defense workshops in her name. Civilian organizations pledged to integrate her message into workplace training. Requests for interviews poured in, but Emily chose carefully, appearing only where the conversation could stay focused on the movement, not on her personal life. She refused brand endorsements, avoided sensational headlines, and redirected attention back to the stories of others using the hashtag. By the end of the month, the WalkerStandard had grown into a network of volunteers and trainers offering free workshops in conflict de-escalation, leadership, and bystander intervention. Emily remained the face of it, but she kept repeating the same line, "This isn't my standard, it's ours." And for the first time since that afternoon in the mess hall, she felt the balance shift, not just in her own life, but in the lives of people she would never meet. Months later, the mess hall incident had faded from headlines, but its echo lived on in training rooms, conference halls, and quiet conversations across the country. Emily stood at the edge of a community gym where a free self-defense workshop was wrapping up. Laughter and applause filled the air as a group of teenagers, boys and girls alike, demonstrated the techniques they'd just learned. One of the girls, no older than 16, approached Emily with a shy smile. "I was nervous to come today," she admitted, "but I read about what you did and I figured if you could stand up, maybe I could too." Emily knelt slightly, meeting her eyes. "You already did," she said simply. As the workshop dispersed, Jack joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. Together, they watched the crowd filter out into the evening light. The hashtag might not be trending every day anymore, but its work was happening, quietly, steadily, where it mattered most. Emily didn't need the internet's attention. She had something far better, proof that even a single act of courage could grow into a standard worth carrying forward. And that, she thought, was more than enough. And that's how one quiet afternoon in a mess hall became the spark for a movement that outlived the headlines. Emily Walker didn't set out to become a symbol, but by standing her ground with control and dignity, she gave thousands of people the courage to do the same. If this story moved you, thank you for spending your time here with us. I'd love to hear what you think. What would you have done if you were in Emily's place? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective might inspire someone else watching today. Don't forget to subscribe to A Simple Woman's Stories so you don't miss the next powerful true story we bring to life. And if you're ready for more, there are other unforgettable stories waiting for you right now. Just click one of the videos on your screen and keep the journey going.